Hello and welcome back, future scientists. I'm Mr. K with Mississippi Public Broadcasting, and we're going to continue our lesson today on photosynthesis. We're kind of getting into the nitty-gritty and some of the more complicated stuff. Okay, we're going to focus on two parts of photosynthesis known as the light-dependent and the light-independent reactions. Okay, so thank y'all so much for being here today. Let's go ahead and hop into it and see what we're learning today. Okay, so to get started with, let's talk about the light-dependent reactions. If something is dependent, it means it requires it to make it happen, right? So light-dependent reactions means this can only happen in the light, right? We need the energy from sunlight to do these reactions. The light-dependent reactions uses energy from sunlight to produce ATP and NADPH. These reactions occur within the thylakoid membranes of the chloroplast. So just a little reminder, okay? Chloroplasts are organelles inside of plant cells. Inside of the chloroplasts are these things called thylakoid membranes. They kind of look like a stack of pancakes, okay? A whole stack of pancakes is called a grana, and then one individual pancake is called a thylakoid membrane. So that's where this is happening inside of the chloroplast. Okay, so we're going to use the energy from sunlight, and we're going to make these two important molecules, ATP and NADPH. And we're going to use these for making the glucose in the next reaction. Okay, what we're looking at here, some things that are kind of going on, I'll point them out to you. So first of all, you can see here, this is called PS2. I'm not talking about your favorite PlayStation system. This is the PS2, which is the photosystem 2. This is the part of this photosynthesis where, if you can see, we have H2O and we're going to split it down the middle. And we're getting oxygen and a hydrogen atom here, okay? This is very hard to do, okay? And then also over here, PS1, this is something known as the electric transport chain. In cellular respiration, we had an ETC, electric transport chain, but we're also using one in the light-dependent reactions, and that happens in the stroma. The stroma is outside of the thylakoid membranes. It's like this fluid structure inside the chloroplast. Okay, so we got the ETC up here. You can see that we're using light, right? We're using light here, we're using light here to produce these two molecules, ATP and the NADPH. Okay, and then lastly, over here we're making, you can see we're starting with ADP. Well, if we add another phosphate to that, we'll make ATP. So adenosine diphosphate for 2 phosphates, and then ATP, adenosine triphosphate 3. So once we add that other phosphate on there, we're making the ATP we need for the next set of reactions. Okay, so what's happening here? So the light-independent reactions, this is the next part, right? So what we were just looking at was light-dependent. This is light-independent. This is the one that kind of has a couple different names, Calvin cycle, dark reactions. They're all talking about the same thing. This can happen in sunlight or in the darkness. It doesn't need sunlight, so it's light-independent. It can happen with or without it. So in the light-independent reactions, those do not require light to occur. Okay, they take place outside of the thylakoids in the stroma, okay, that liquid part of the chloroplast. Okay, here's kind of a breakdown of what's going on, an overview. Okay, so an overview of photosynthesis, the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions, sometimes called the carbon reactions or the Calvin cycle. These are reactions that occur at different sites within the chloroplast. So over here we have the light reactions. It's happening in the thylakoids, okay? We're taking in light from the sun. We also need water here. What happens is we split that water, okay? When we split it, we produce oxygen, which we don't really need, but we do need the hydrogen here to make that NADPH. Okay, so a byproduct of the light reactions is oxygen, which is very important to us because that's what we breathe, okay? Through this process, we also make ATP and NADPH, which we need to fuel these next set of reactions, okay? The next set of reactions are called the dark reactions or the carbon reactions or the light-independent reactions, a lot of different names here. What's going on here is that we're absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, okay? We're going to use that to make glucose, okay? So we take some of the hydrogens from the water and we kind of add it to the CO, the carbon dioxide, and that's where the glucose is coming from. Okay, so light reactions and light independent reactions. This one happens in the thylakoids, this one happens in the stroma. We're producing oxygen here and we're producing glucose here, okay? Let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. Okay, so the light reactions. Reminder, these happen in the thylakoid membrane of the chloroplast. The water is split into oxygen gas and hydrogen. Okay, we're going to use light energy from the sun. When we're talking about light as energy, we'll call them photons. So we use photons, and that's going to generate chemical energy compounds, which is the ATP and the NADPH. Okay? Next, this is kind of a overview of it. You can see here that for the light reactions, we have water, we have NADP+, we have adenosine diphosphate, and 3 extra phosphate molecules. Through using the light energy, what we're going to make here is this. So we split this water molecule, that's where this oxygen gas is coming from that's so important to us, okay? We use the 2 H's here, okay, to make NADPH. So notice here how this was NADP+. We're taking those hydrogens here and putting them here, so now we have NADPH, okay? These come together, the adenosine diphosphate and an extra phosphate, these come together to make ATP, okay? And then we're kind of left over with a couple of electrons and a couple of hydrogens, okay? This is the light reactions. The chemical energy compounds are produced from the light reactions, and water is split into oxygen and protons. Okay, so now we'll get into the dark reactions or the light independent reactions or the carbon reactions. They're all the same thing. Okay, so in the light independent reactions, again, this can occur in the light or in the dark. Okay, it takes place in the stroma of the chloroplast. So that's the liquid part outside of the grana. Okay. It uses the chemical energy produced in the light reactions, which is the ATP and the NADPH, and it reduces carbon dioxide to make carbohydrates, specifically glucose. Okay? The CO2 is then converted to sugar through the Calvin cycle. Okay? Great job. So let's get into the Calvin cycle in a little bit more detail here. Okay? So the Calvin cycle. The first product of the Calvin cycle is a 3-carbon molecule called 3-PGA. Okay, and this is why some plants are known as C3 plants. This is the C3 cycle. Okay, an enzyme is used here called rubisco. Okay, rubisco catalyzes the initial reactions of the Calvin cycle. Rubisco is the most important, one of the most abundant proteins on Earth. Okay, so this is like an older form of photosynthesis. What's going on here is this rubisco is really, really good at helping this whole photosynthesis process, but photosynthesis was developed when there wasn't much oxygen in the atmosphere. Today, now that there's so much oxygen in the atmosphere, the rubisco kind of gets confused, and sometimes it takes oxygen and starts breaking it down instead of the carbon dioxide. We'll compare that to the C4 here in just a second. So most plants use the Calvin cycle to convert CO2 into sugars, and these plants are called C3 plants. C3 plants, they're not as efficient at photosynthesis, and they're not as good in hot environments because of that. Okay, the type of plants that are good in hot environments are called C4 plants. Okay, and we'll get into that in just a second. Here's a summary of the carbon reactions. Okay, so what's going on here? We have carbon dioxide, we have ATP, NADPH, and water, and that's going to yield through the carbon reactions or the light independent reactions. That's where the glucose is coming from. So glucose is made in the light independent, the Calvin, the carbon reactions. Okay. We're also going to yield ADP. We used up a lot of this ATP. We've used the energy from it. When you use up ATP, you get ADP, okay? And then these are extra phosphates to go along with it. We have some NADP plus here. We're also going to produce those water molecules and the oxygen as well, okay? So let's talk about some limitations of photosynthesis. This is where the C3 versus C4 plants become so important. Okay, so photosynthesis is not perfect in C3 plants. its efficiency rate is only about 1 to 4%. And again, the reason for this is that rubisco. It gets confused. When we first made photosynthesis, there wasn't much oxygen in the atmosphere, so it didn't have to worry about distinguishing between carbon dioxide and oxygen. But now that there is so much oxygen in the atmosphere, rubisco kind of gets confused. Okay, so this is a low efficiency because of that. Okay, this photorespiration occurs and the internal carbon dioxide concentration becomes too low, causing rubisco to begin fixing oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. So that's kind of what I was talking about earlier. This whole process could be more efficient than it really is, but the rubisco gets confused, and sometimes it breaks down oxygen instead of carbon dioxide. And when that happens, we can't do photosynthesis the right way. This is what happens in C3 plants, okay? But C4 plants are a little bit more efficient. The rubisco in these plants aren't getting confused as much, and that lets them live in hotter environments. Okay, C4 plants produce a 4-carbon molecule as their first product instead of a 3-carbon molecule. Plants like sugarcane and corn, which use the C4 pathway, are more efficient than C3 plants and are adapted to grow in hotter climates with more light. Okay, so for example, sugarcane has a photosynthesis efficiency of 7%, and C4 plants also have a distinct leaf anatomy compared to C3 plants. So the C4 plants are about twice as efficient, twice as more proficient as the C3 plants. And examples of these are sugarcane and corn and some other plants, and it lets them live in those hotter environments. Okay, y'all, thank you so much. You can tell how complicated this stuff is. So we're gonna practice a little bit. I have another worksheet we're gonna do. So teacher, if you could, go ahead and pass those out, okay? And when y'all are ready for a review, I'll be waiting. Just come back to me and unpause the video, and I'll review that worksheet with y'all. So go ahead, take a couple seconds and pass that out, and then unpause the video when you're ready. All right, so y'all, photosynthesis is so complicated. I have some review questions to make sure we know what's going on. So I'm gonna go over it with y'all. Y'all feel free to change or add anything you don't have, and that way we're all on the same page and we can start to figure this stuff out, okay? So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into it and see what y'all came up with. So the first one here, there is a word bank at the bottom, so just feel free to use that and kind of cross out your answers as we're going over them, and then that makes the process of elimination a little bit easier. So number 1 says, the main pigment involved in photosynthesis is what? Well, hopefully we remember that this is called chlorophyll, okay? Chlorophyll is the pigment that we're using here. So we'll go ahead and write that in. Chlorophyll is that green pigment. It's why plants are green, because they're filled with this chlorophyll, which is a green pigment. So number 2, photosynthesis primarily takes place in the blank of plant cells. So what organelle does photosynthesis occur in? Kind of sounds like chloroplast. It kind of sounds like chlorophyll, sorry, this is chloroplast. This is a special organelle. It's not in animal cells, but it is in cells of plants and algae and some bacteria, that's cyanobacteria, okay? Chloroplast is a special organelle. Okay, number 3, the gas blank is taken in by plants during photosynthesis. So what do plants take in out of the atmosphere to do this whole process? Well, that's the carbon dioxide, okay? And I'm gonna write carbon dioxide as CO2. You might have the full word spelled out there, but they're the same thing, CO2 and carbon dioxide, okay? Let's go to the next one, number 4. The blank is where the light-dependent reactions occur. So inside of the chloroplast, there's a couple of different parts. You have the thylakoid and the grana, and you also have the stroma. Out of those 3, where is the light-dependent reactions happening? Well, that's happening in the thylakoid membrane, okay? That's the thylakoid, okay? They look like little green pancakes, okay? Let's go to the next one, 5. The product of photosynthesis is blank, which is used by the plant as food. So we are producing a couple of different things through photosynthesis, but it says that the plants use as food. So what product of photosynthesis is the plant needing and it uses it as food. Well, for 5, I think we should go with glucose here, okay? Glucose is that super important sugar that the plants make through photosynthesis. They use it as food. They do also make oxygen, but that's more for the animals. Okay, the plants don't really care about that oxygen too much. So make sure you got those, and I'm going to scroll down. All right. So starting up here at number 6, let's see. This says, the oxygen released during photosynthesis comes from the splitting of what? So where is that oxygen coming from? Well, we split water. Remember, when we split water, we get an O2 molecule and a hydrogen molecule, a hydrogen atom, and that O2 is what we breathe, so that's all coming from water. Okay, let's go to the next one. The pores on the underside of leaves that allow gas exchange are called what? What are these called? Well, I mentioned it a couple times in the lecture. These are called stomata. The same way you exchange gases with the atmosphere with your mouth and your nose through breathing, plants exchange carbon dioxide and oxygen through these little openings on the leaves called stomata. And they can bring in carbon dioxide and get rid of their oxygen. So the next one, number 8, this says, the energy required for photosynthesis is provided by what? What is it provided by? It's provided by sunlight. Okay, we need that sunlight to do photosynthesis. All right, let's go to the next one, 9. The blank reactions convert solar energy into chemical energy in the form of ATP and NADPH. Okay, well, which ones need the solar energy? Do the light independent or the light dependent need light? Well, light dependent needs the light, right? So we're going to go with the light reactions. Okay, the light dependent reactions need that solar energy, right? All right, let's go to the next one, 10. The blank is the cycle that converts carbon dioxide into glucose. Okay, remember that this one has a couple of different names, okay? So you might there's a couple different names here. We could put the dark reaction, we could put the light independent reaction, and our word bank down there is called the Calvin cycle. So let's write Calvin. Okay, the Calvin cycle, that's where we're making the glucose. Okay, 11, the blank is a series of proteins in the thylakoid membrane that converts light energy into chemical energy. So what is this called? This is the ETC, or the electric transport chain. There's no way I'm fitting all of that on this little line, so I'll just abbreviate it as ETC, electric transport chain. That's in the stroma. It's a series of proteins, and it's how we convert light energy into chemical energy. Great. Okay, so make sure you got all of those. We'll do these last couple ones here in just a moment. So let me scroll down, and we'll knock these last couple out. So 12 says, the stacks of thylakoid within the chloroplast are called what? Well, these are called grana. Okay? If each thylakoid membrane is a pancake, then a stack of pancakes is called a grana. Okay? Let's go to the next one, 13. A gas that is produced by photosynthesis is what? This is oxygen. This is where the oxygen that you're breathing currently came from, is through photosynthesis. So let's do the next one, 14. Glucose is broken down into blank so it can be used by the cells. Well, remember, plants, producers, autotrophs, yes, they do photosynthesis. They make their own food, but it doesn't stop there. They also have to take that glucose and break it into ATP. That's what cells need in order to use the energy. So they take the glucose, they do cellular respiration, they turn the glucose into ATP, and the cells use the ATP to do the things they need to. So ATP is the answer for 14. Last one here, 15. The liquid portion inside of chloroplast is called what? That's called the stroma. Okay? Stroma. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for following along with me today. Your teacher has some other things that you can practice this on, so make sure to give it your best effort, and I hope everybody has a great day.